Oh, no, we should be very proud of them.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm thrilled to have a distinguished panel here to speak about what I think is one of the most underappreciated levers in our transition of the global economy to net zero, which is the way that digital technologies, their use, putting them into different sectors in the economy, can actually help us move towards net zero goals. My name is Karen Carniel-Tambour. I'm Co-Chief Investment Officer for Sustainability at Bridgewater Associates. I want to remind you all this is being live streamed, and if you're sharing anything about this session throughout the session, please use the hashtag WEF22. I'm very excited to have this panel to speak about this topic, and we have 4 distinguished panelists to talk us through this from different industries. We have Jean-Pascal Tricoire, who is CEO of Schneider Electric. We have Zoe Yunovich, who is head of upstream at Shell. We have Christian Klein, CEO of SAP, and Jose Alvarez, who is CEO of Telefonica. And I'm going to do about a 40-minute conversation, and I would love to open up to some questions from the audience. And I'm going to start by asking each of you, while research has found there's a lot of ways to use digital technologies to reduce emissions, this is generally a pretty underappreciated lever. So I'd love to hear what you think the size of the opportunity is, and as concretely as possible from your industry and your experience, what does it literally mean? How can you use digital technologies to make a material impact on our net zero goals? Let's start with you, Jean-Pascal.
Yeah, so if you make things simple, climate change is 80% about emissions, and emissions is 80% about the way we consume and we produce energy. And when we look at the energy equation, well, digital for us is the biggest catalyzer of efficiency, of reducing energy consumption. When the world speaks about energy, normally everybody speaks about supply, and supply can be very passionate. It's about renewable, non-renewable, windmills, nuclear. But in fact, the greenest, the cheapest, the fastest way to generate green energy is to save energy. And what we put together at Schneider are solutions which allow better efficiency thanks to digitization and electrification that brings decarbonization. So now, if you look, why is digitization your best path to efficiency and to decarbonization? The first thing is that it's the only way to measure where you are. When you speak to CEOs in the world that normally know their IT costs very precisely, they never know their energy cost. Therefore, they don't know their emissions. So the first thing is to use digitization to save. The second thing is use digitization to measure. The second thing is to use digitization to save. And to save, you need to connect the process. In a manufacturing, it's going to be the production process to your energy system. In a building, it's going to be the way people live in the building with the energy distribution. So what we do is to integrate those two, which was not possible before. But now that everything is connected, you can integrate those. You can connect everything on the shop floor and connect it to the cloud so that everybody has a visibility on the data. Then you can operate software that gives you a visibility of the whole system all over the life cycle, from the time it was designed to reduce the carbon footprint of what you are building to the time you operate it, which normally represents 80% of the carbon footprint of any installation during its life cycle. And finally, you can have people managing. They used to manage side by side, building by building. Now they can have a view of their total company by connecting the connected into one repository. So digitization changes everything because it gives you the data. Now you measure, because it connects what was not connected. And if you let me just finish that loop, finally you can connect everything from the plant to the plug, because the future of production of energy is renewable. And while before you were producing on one side and consuming on the other side, and there was no connection between the two, because now everything is connected through a smart grid, you can incite everybody to store energy or to consume when electricity is cheap and green. So it's a complete reversal of the paradigm of energy that we are putting together, and that can happen only because everything is connected. Return on investment, the cheapest, time of implementation, very short respect to the old ways of doing. And we are not, or we have not yet implemented this at scale because these are new technologies and we need to work on it together.
Thank you. Let's go to Zoe and get a perspective from energy company.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying, in my opinion, deep decarbonization of the broader energy ecosystem isn't going to be possible without a comprehensive digitization of the entire value chain. And that does speak all the way through from the supply of products into the consumption of products or demand. I think it's fair to say, of course, digital is one of the numerous tools. Let's remember that digital itself doesn't abate carbon, but I think it does do an incredibly important role in reducing emissions and identifying where we've got the most opportunity to actually reduce our carbon footprint. And shall we think about this really in three parts? The first is, of course, around how we seek to leverage digitization in our own scope 1 and 2 or in our own assets. And the second is how we refocus the way digital tools can be used in their consumption. And then, of course, there's the technology opportunities that we find which stitch this together and, of course, broaden the frame for which we can leverage digital. But some examples always help to bring that to light. So within our existing assets, we, of course, have a global carbon abatement tool, something we've had for quite some time, in fact, where we actually log all of the carbon emissions that we see across our broader scope 1 and 2. And that gives us insights around where are the biggest opportunities for us to focus and, of course, make the biggest difference. But it also, of course, extends beyond that. We now use satellite imaging to have a look at where we've got methane emissions. You can now use drones with sensors, robots, and so forth, which enable you to get into areas that perhaps you might not have frequented so often. So it helps you to identify the way you optimize your maintenance, but also the way you optimize your operations. A lot of remote piloted systems or remote operated systems can give us predictive information around where we may need to do proactive maintenance. And of course, if you can get to things before they fail, it helps to reduce the emissions associated with those energy flows. When it comes to things like the way we orientate to our sectors, and of course there are many hard to abate sectors that we're working really closely with, whether it be from aviation to cement to steel manufacturing, or indeed to sort of some of the power or e-mobility. And so maybe a couple of examples I think worth highlighting. We do find power, of course, is moving increasingly to decentralized opportunities. So whether that be solar rooftops or whether that be people leveraging their cars when connected into battery storage, we've got a much broader decentralized suite of energy products now available for power. So of course, leveraging digital technologies enables you to create that virtual power plant and map how you can find a way to bring that to the consumption into the demand side and then optimize it so that you allow for intermittency and bring, I think, a more structural ecosystem to stability of power. And finally, I think it's worth saying in the technology space, a lot of the things that we had historically done in the hydrocarbon extraction are now very much the leverage points for which we move into new energies. Carbon capture and storage, of course, a lot of monitoring around how you can sequester carbon, how you can give yourself confidence around the ecosystem and the subsurface. How can you use quantum data to look at how you optimize the wind turbines offshore, and the ways through which you can leverage technology to accelerate some of the things that we're doing in hydrogen, in biofuels, and of course in the green power. So just a few things, I think, to get us started.
Thank you. Let's go to you, Christian.
Perfect. So, look, of course, working for SAP, I, of course, have to say that technology is make or break to achieve net zero. What should I say differently? I mean, just one practical example. When you look at SAP, today everyone reports, the financial ledger with our software. In the DAX 40, 39 are doing it, one didn't do it. Wirecard, we all know what happened. They didn't have the data right. So the point is now what we are saying is that data, the visibility, coming back to Jean-Philippe's point, is very crucial. And what we want to also do with our technology is to provide in the future also a green ledger, so that we have standard reporting, on, for example, carbon emissions, on all ESG social data is also, of course, also very important. So we are infusing this in our technology to provide transparency, because today when Shell is reporting on ESG, I'm not sure if this is really comparable and standardized when you compare it to ExxonMobil, to P66, and to others. And this is clearly on us, with our technology to provide this transparency. Now, when you look at, your operations, 20% of your carbon footprint is obviously oftentimes in your enterprise, but 80% is in your supply chain, and also in Scope 3, in Horizon 3. And this is where with Catena X, for example, now we brought together the whole automotive industry to connect, all car manufacturers with all of their suppliers down to the raw material. That, of course, leads to a resilient supply chain, but also leads to the fact that you now can track carbon down to the raw material, and you can, make conscious decisions now based on this transparency. So now we are talking end-to-end and solving this transparency issue. And now it's on us also to do the same for life science and for other industries. And then last but not least, only when you have that data, for example, with Shell, we are now working on business travel. So I came here to Davos, and I came via electric car. But, today when I book my business travel with Concur, great solution, I'm getting the costs, I'm getting how long it takes, but I'm not getting how sustainable it is. Starting from June on, we're going to provide this data so you can make a conscious decision. Electric car, to flight, not good, or actually train. And this is, where data can so much help. Think about your procurement people. Can they make today conscious decisions around, do I now, supply from this supplier? Cost, quality, but what they miss is sustainability data. And I feel this is, on the technology side, a key aspect now to, produce this foundation. Yeah?
Fantastic. Let's go to you, Jose.
Well, delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting us. We are of the opinion that there is no green without digital. And in fact, we are all in the same opinion here. But for that, we need the right infrastructure. And we need to understand that the confinement, the pandemic, has been like a time machine. Things that were supposed to happen 5 years from now are happening now. Every week of confinement has been a year in digital adoption. So all the things that were supposed to happen 5 years from now are here now, on the residential side, but also on the industrial side. And therefore, if we want this to happen, we need to understand that there is a massive pressure on infrastructure. Digital infrastructure is carrying every year 50% more data traffic than the year before. So imagine any industry that needs to build capacity, extra capacity, 50% more every year. That's what we are building. The good thing is that there is state-of-the-art new infrastructure, which is fiber plus 5G standalone, that is very effective. It's very effective in channeling this amount of information. But we need to understand that the digital implication of our business is that we can save between 15 and 30% of carbon emission in the next 20 years by using digital technology. That's the kind of savings that we can have by using all this information, by applying that to smart factories, by applying that to smart cities, by applying that to smart roads, to smart agriculture. So this is the kind of transformation that flows through the network. So here the message is that if we want to have a green transition effectively, and that has been accelerated by the pandemic, we need to heavily invest in digital infrastructure, because without that, we are not going to be efficient to generate this amount of information. And then technology layers are going to help us. We are going to generate such a huge amount of information in the next 10 years that we need to rethink the cloud system. Edge computing is going to be much more effective, which means that we are going to have to process more things at the edge of the network rather than on the cloud, because it's going to be saving a huge amount of energy and money. So there is a lot of things that we can do together from the infrastructure side with the platform side in order to be very efficient on that regard. Just to give you an idea, the traffic on the networks has been multiplied by 7 times in the last 10 years, and we are generating 7% less consumption of energy than 10 years ago. That's the kind of things that you can do with infrastructure.
Wow. Well, I would be remiss not to mention that WEF is going to publish some research with Accenture that looks at a few hard-to-abate sectors and shows that there could be about a 20% emission reduction from digital technologies. And I have to say, as a macroeconomist that knows just how hard it is to make other changes toward net zero, many years, from creating a new power plant or new type of energy source till it comes online, and a lot of logistical difficulties, this feels like a much easier lift. This feels like much faster from idea to execution and actual abatement of emissions. What do each of you see as the challenges? Why this is not happening faster? What are the challenges that are stopping this? And therefore, on the other side, the levers that might be able to accelerate using digital technologies to make more impact toward net zero more rapidly than we practically could with many other levers?
Well, let's start by observing that I would say technologies today exist to cut 70% of the emissions. And what I see very often in those circles that are speaking about climate change and carbon reduction is that we push it back to the next innovation 10 to 20 years from now. The reality is that the next 10 years are far more important till 2030 than the one after, because everything we built which is not sustainable in the next 10 years will be here for the next 50. So every decision we make is counting now to start with. Technologies do exist, and I think the world is moving tremendously fast. And we have a huge burning platform. We are in Europe at the moment, see what's happening with the energy situation. We will have to transition from fossil fuel to electrical systems very, very fast, because our source of fossil fuel is at risk with the present war in Ukraine. So we have this burning platform. What strikes me, there is no sense of urgency. I met the same circumstances when I was working in Japan when Fukushima happened. We had to face -25 on the power consumption in 1 week, and we did it. Japan did it. We are probably facing the same challenge here, and I don't see the same consistency. On the top of it, I've been going from one meeting to the next meeting in the past day. We are clearly not on the right trajectory for climate change. There is urgency. We are not there. So if we want net zero by 2050, it starts now. So let's look at what we have at our disposal to make it happen. Simple system for digitization and electrification, because the path to net zero is electrical and digital together, right? And it's a lot about retrofit, because a large part of the emission is not coming from the new, it's going to come from us retrofitting and changing what we have. So it comes from end-to-end easy-to-connect systems. On 5G will bring a lot, for instance, and it's coming really online on that scale in the next coming 2 years. Then consolidating your data. This is what we do at Schneider, is opening for you a data lake, a data hub, where you can gather all of your data, process, energy, you can correlate it, work on it, and apply on it analytics, software, which is already ready, and go from a management on the top of it, which was step by step in the life cycle, to a completely integrated life cycle. What you do at the moment you build on the digital twin goes into operation on the same digital twin. And then you can keep improving your operation. Those systems have to be open because everybody wants to bring its pinch of salt and its bit of differentiation on what it has to do. And this has to be an open system to communities, because when you go in a Shell factory, you're going to have some Schneider system and software, and maybe we can help improving. Or there will be a connection to AC, and we have to be able, all the stakeholders, utilities, technology providers, facility managers, and other companies to be able to help on that one. I think this is existing today, but guess what? That was not existing 5 years ago. So architects, designers, operators have to rethink everything, and we human beings take a long time to understand that change is happening. So it's all about us now. Tools are happening, or are existing.
Thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, maybe building on that, I think if I look back at the journey we've been on in Shell, I think we really struggled in the first instance to actually provide freedom for people to experiment with what digitization looked like, which often ended, I can say, with people focusing on the fancy tools, the things that actually allow them to feel like they're digitizing, but it was incredibly difficult for us to replicate and scale. And so we've been through a journey of trying to empower people to fiddle with the tools, which is really exciting, but it wasn't driving the systemic change that really needed to happen. So we've having to couple that with kind of a more global approach around where we need the data standards, how do we actually expect our cloud to work, what sort of monitors do we need, and how do they plug in, so that we can actually then test something in a pilot, understand what's happening, and then rapidly deploy it at scale and push it out. But there's been a real, I should say, balance between what is sort of pushed down from a hierarchy point of view, which I think is important from the data and the data hierarchy, versus how you then allow people to innovate. I think we've come a long way, and so now I think we've got a much better understanding around where common is important and where we need the standards in place within our own ecosystem. And now we've got the ability to turn back on those freedoms. So we've got many people who can now do their own programming, who can actually innovate, so that we can get into that kind of fail fast, learn, and continue to improve. So I think I'd say that the pace for which we are now able to deploy technologies is growing much faster, because we've got a much stronger foundation, because we've got clarity, if I can describe it that way, around the way we want our cloud-based ecosystems to operate. And of course, historically, we used to do a lot of proprietary things. We would make things, and now we've realized that indeed the open standards, the opportunity to allow many to innovate is really important. Perhaps the other thing to describe is we've also recognized, I think it picks up on Christian's point, there's so much more opportunity now as we sort of go to track choices to customers around things like what we call digital passports, almost for the molecular chain, so that you've got confidence that if you're buying hydrogen, that it comes from a green electron, and you've got that transparency around how the carbon has mapped all the way through the value chain. And I think that that now enables us, and I think again on examples like if you want to fly somewhere, because you can't travel by electric car, utilising things like blockchain to allow you to say, how do I connect a physical flight with a virtual offset opportunity through sustainable aviation fuel? We've actually got a much broader ecosystem that can bring together the products and the customer demand in a way that digitisation, I think, had never contemplated previously. So for me, I'd say the clarity on where the standards are really important, then allowing that experimentation so that you can scale and replicate, and then making sure we operate in that open manner with collaborations and the partnerships so that we can really accelerate rapidly.
Christian.
Look, besides the missing data and transparency on ESG to make conscious decision, I think the one thing what is missing is oftentimes coverage. So I'm making, as the CEO, every day I'm making decisions. So, SAP, we are going through a transformation, cloud, so there is some short-term pressure on margin. Now, do I invest into renewable energy for our data centers and take another hit on the expense side and maybe get hammered by the financial market, a quarter later, or do I shift these investments out? So do I do it or not? Do I have the courage? And am I willing to explain that? Investors have to ask themselves, hey, now rising inflation, rising prices, do we sacrifice maybe, some expectations on the bottom line to further support the companies to optimize their green line? Am I willing to do that? Am I sticking to a company because I see they do the right thing? I didn't see yet a headline for SAP in my earnings that, oh, fantastic, SAP may be a little bit short on margin, but great, we are running with renewable energy our data centers. I didn't see that. And then as consumers, we are making these decisions. Am I willing to pay more, for a sustainable product? Or as a CIO, am I willing to pay more a bit, for a product which is sourced by renewable energy? Are we making those decisions, yes or no? And for me, way too often, we are not always going into this direction. There's a lot of talk, but at the end, it's really about courage, which at the end is also make or break if we gonna solve this biggest challenge what we have as a society.
Jose.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Christian. And we need to walk the talk, and we need to apply the strategy to ourselves. And that's what we are trying to do. We have committed to become net zero neutral in 2025 in our 4 largest markets. But there is no way we can do that if we were not committing to do the investment that Christian was mentioning. I mean, we need to understand that deploying a network of this kind, fiber plus 5G, is not an evolution from the previous network. It's not an evolution from the copper network. It's a brand new network. So you build a brand new network once every generation. And we have been responsible for building that. And if you delay that decision, then you become a bottleneck for the green transition. So we decided to do that years ago. That has not been the favor of the market we have not been the flavor of the market for a few years. But now we are getting there. And once you deploy that, you start to see that the network is amazingly smart and do amazing things in terms of green transition, but in terms of efficiency, because you are a really enabler of that. You need to understand that deploying fiber is like deploying a railroad 200 years ago. It changes the nature of the economy. It changes everything. A fiber network can be run with 15% of the energy of the copper network. A 5G network can be run with 20% of the energy of a 4G network. That's the kind of impact that we directly have. But the impact that we have on the economy is massive. So what do we think is missing? We think the strategic determination of building this infrastructure at the European level, for example, the right incentives to do that. We have been forced to do that because our copper network was in pain. But it makes no sense that there is, more fiber deployed in my home country in Spain than in the sum of the UK, Germany, and Italy together. This needs to be corrected. So my point is that we need to build the right incentives, and this can be done with public policy. I think this is the time for public policy with capital P's, which means that it's the time to commit. It's the time to make sure that we do the right bets. Because again, there is no green without digital, and we need to understand that. The amount of information that is being generated by the network when it becomes massively IP and smart is just amazing. The kind of things that you can do with the platforms that they are building is just amazing. So my point is that it is the time to commit, because we tend to think about energy. 2 years ago, we thought about energy in terms of the impact on climate change. Now we have another 2 factors of energy, which is affordability and availability, which means that the more we save in energy, the more efficient we become, and the more green transition we accelerate, the more we accelerate the green transition. So the message from my side is it's time to walk the talk, each of us and societies, and that demands public policy.
Great. I would love to hear from each of you one more, as practical as you can example. I still find this space is kind of rife with terminology that people are not super clear on. So another really practical example from your space. And if you'd like, I'd love to have you connected to what Jose said of, is that an example where public policy could make a difference in some way, or more one where what Christian talked about, where it's really just, the courage of the leaders to go see that opportunity and pursue it?
So first, I'll come back to what was said before. I think people completely underestimate how much going to sustainability and carbon reduction can actually make you economically more performing. Because at the end of the day, it's about cutting waste, eliminating waste, which industry has been doing all the time. We used to call that productivity. But if you diminish your dependency to energy costs, for instance, that makes you tremendously more performing and more competitive. So what I see in my industry when I look at my customers, people who have been really strong in digitization, and think even about extreme conditions like COVID, people who are connected, digitized, and people who are not relying on the high level of energy consumption today are faring far better than all the other ones. I'm not even speaking about scope 3, which was referred before. If you want to work with Schneider, you'd better be very good on your energy spending. And we are thousands of companies taking those commitments. So it's a question of competitiveness to your customers. So examples, right? We just finished one building in France, normal building, I would say in terms of structure. We use digitization to reduce the energy consumption. Basically, you are not in a room, everything switches off. We have managed to get rid of HVAC by using geothermal connected. That goes directly all the cooling of the building in a tough place, very hot in the summer, snow in the winter, so demanding place. There is everything managed from geothermal. And we are speaking about decentralized generation, simple solar farm on the top, on the rooftop, net zero building at the core of Europe. Overcost for the active part, 5%, respect to a traditional way of doing. Time of return on investment, 3 years before the increase of energy costs, now 2 years on less if it keeps going like this. That's one example. I would take exactly the same examples in manufacturing. We used an iron and steel manufacturer last month in Europe, long project. Digitization only 170 tons of carbon saved, 20% of efficiency gained, uptime, resilience, avoiding breakdown because things being digitized, you can apply predictive maintenance, plus 10%. Those are a few examples. I have a list of hundreds. Putting that into action in months, not in years. Most of it on brownfield, because this is where most of the action must take place.
Definitely inspiring. Let's go to you, Zoe.
Well, I wouldn't mind picking up, because I think on Christian's point on courage, I think courage in energy looks like putting $1 billion in a hydrogen electrolyzer without a market. Or talks about investing in a hydrogen fatty acids plant to produce biofuels without a market. Courage in digitization, for me, is a table stake. It's pretty easy to find the business case. Because in the most part, there are these opportunities, they're readily available, it's about deployment, and the returns are pretty significant. So it's about making sure that you prioritize those things that obviously can deliver near term. So courage in the broader decarbonisation, I think, comes in a much more challenging conversation around capital deployment. And so I think then when you do come back to what are the pragmatic examples, gosh, I think that the biggest one, I think, is really about how we navigate digitization as a way of being in how we produce the products that we've got. And I think a couple of areas of collaborations, I mean, we're finding ways, and I think we do this with SAP, where we can look at ways that we can actually electrify the mobility fleet for SAP. We can look at ways through which we can provide rooftop solar to reduce the footprint of the German head office. And as a collaboration in return, SAP can help us to create ways that carbon is transparent in the way that we leverage decision-making. And so that broader ecosystem around how we can offer a product and that we can get a service in return that enables us collectively to be lower in carbon and higher in efficiency. What we've done within Shell to help drive that clarity around, I think, peers between financial and carbon performance, in the same way that you would run an annual planning process and you would allocate to your various divisions an operating or a capital budget, we have a carbon budget by each of the respective businesses. And so then you have to operate with a constantly reducing carbon budget. And so it brings, at every decision, we have the operating efficiency or the fiscal parameters in parallel and in peer with the carbon. Now, it's difficult because today some of our reporting is still a little bit more aggregated and lagging. So what we need to be doing is trying to bring that carbon information to the table live. So you can make a decision around whether you buy a third-party product or whether you're better off instead producing or using that carbon budget in a different way to optimize your overall financial performance. And so that's the next domain of opportunity. So if I were to look at a place that we're working really hard, is to not be in the rear vision mirror on carbon, and it's not about reporting, but it's about leveraging as an active decision-making with the data that we've described to draw the right tensions and progress.
Excellent. Christian.
Yeah, another practical example. I mean, first, of course, in the oil and gas, I mean, now we can always criticize, about fossils and what happened in the past, but they are real, and we are helping them, to move also to more renewable business models. A very practical example is, for example, Allbirds. So Allbirds didn't have the courage today to wear the Allbirds, but they are actually producing sustainable shoes because they believe they can compete on leading with sustainability. So they are actually printing the carbon footprint on every shoe. So they came to us and said, SAP, please help me. I need a carbon, not only here from my own factory, but again, from all the suppliers, everything, my whole operations, as I want to be a credible player. And with that, we're going to lead. And to the point earlier on, are the consumers then also willing to pay a higher price? It works. It works great. So they're having a big success. And looking at other big sports brands, knowing them, some of them really well, they believe the same. And this is, the way to go. How we also want to, help with our technology, to drive the transformation of the business model, not only to grow better and to produce, with a higher productivity, but also to one, more sustainability.
Like you, I also lack the courage today to wear my very comfortable Allbirds shoes. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Jose.
Well, aggregating everything that has been said, what I can say is that if you extrapolate the current trends in terms of applying this state-of-the-art infrastructure to the platforms that they are building in smart factories, savings, efficiency, the amount of information, smart cities, smart roads, smart agriculture, and smart grids. If you add the current trends and you project them in the future for the next 8 years, you can save between 15 and 30% of global emissions just by doing that. And that's the footprint, the carbon footprint of the US and Europe together. That's the kind of things that can be done. Far for that, we need again to have all these things in place. Platforms are there. We have already the platforms, so it's about the infrastructure. So my point is that, again, technology is going to help to solve this problem, but we need to commit the resources to do it now. I mean, because again, the pandemic has accelerated everything. This is not going to wait for us. So my point is that we have everything in place. We have the infrastructure. We can build infrastructure. The technology to run this infrastructure is available. The technology is evolving. We have the platforms on top of that to make everything smart enough to generate less consumption of energy. But the time is now.
Great. Well, before I open up for questions, I'd love to just do a quick lightning round of, we have a room full, and I'm sure on the live stream as well, of business leaders in lots of different industries. What message would you have for them in terms of how to do this relative to what they're doing today? I think all of your examples probably inspired them as they're inspiring me to think about different ways that we could transform our businesses. How should they look for more examples? Should they hire differently? Should they change their annual planning process? Should they be lobbying their governments in some way? What are partnerships they could enter into? What are the fastest ways that you would advise them to kind of accelerate what they're each doing?
Well, the writing is on the wall. As a CEO, I've got two missions. Put my company into strong tailwinds and reduce at maximum risks, right? And among those, climate change, carbon emission, and everything is a top priority. So I think all of us have to address it on with the right feeling of urgency, on knowing that the world can pivot. If we don't invest into that, investment we've done will lose a lot of value in the future. So it's about moving. I think for many places in the world, it's about moving yesterday with a high sense of urgency. If there is only one message, it's start by measuring, knowing what you do. And this is in your building, in your plants, in your data centers, in your infrastructure. Put the plugs, collect the data, and then from the data, you can strategize, and then you can implement. And rely on partners. Schneider, of course, will be your preferred partner, but you have others who can help you. But really, we are partnering with 50% of the top companies which are going for SBT. So there is experience out there to help you on that way. And then experiment, cookie cut applications from what you've learned from the first deployments. That would be, but first measuring, because again, you have to know what you're emitting, you have to know what you are consuming, and you can do it in a very simple and cheap way thanks to digitalization, which was our topic.
Yeah, I'm going to say partnerships, but I think it needs to be applied in 3 domains. I do think you have to lead by example based on the footprint of your own emissions. And so I think, scope 1 and 2, an enormous amount of time. You don't come with credibility if you can't test and de-risk the solutions that you want to offer customers later. And so I think accelerating your own delivery of scope 1 and 2 emissions, I think, is paramount. Then, of course, it is around typically in our value chains, the majority of emissions, certainly in the energy sector, sit within those hard-to-abate sectors. And so for us, it's very much then saying, OK, we can improve our scope 1 and 2, but we'll probably tackle 5% of the broader problem. And so therefore, we need to be really working in partnerships and coalitions around those hard to abate sectors. How do we make sure that there is momentum captured through open sourcing and learning from others, which of course the partnerships provide? And then we keep talking about technology because it's the key enabler that allows you to accelerate not just the creation of alternate products, like things like biofuels, as we discussed before, but it also allows you to look at ways through which you can leverage improvements around technologies which will fundamentally seek to abate, in addition to optimizing, which digital can obviously do. So I'd say, yeah, look after your own emissions, test if in your value chain the emissions actually sit elsewhere, partner as much as you can, and then continue to leverage those data tools to focus you in on the right technologies for improvements.
And for me, actually, it's always, for the business leader, it's always a trade-off between, profit and sustainability. But oftentimes, it also can happen together. So when you're running these days a digital transformation project, not only looking into new digital business models to grow, your company, but also, the second one is oftentimes automation for the productivity. The third one should be sustainability, so that you have this as a third dimension, in your transformation, and then challenge your technology partners. Challenge them and ask them, are you only having here a nice little dashboard to pull together not reliable data? Or how can you help me also to come to a reliable data source to do these trade-offs and see potentially that it can come together, profit and sustainability?
I think that the last 6 years have taught us that the unexpected things happen. If somebody told us 7 years ago that we were going to live through a Brexit, a pandemic, and a war in Europe, we would have not believed that. So my message here is that these are quotes that say that everybody can read the message on the wall, but we all think it's intended for somebody else. So it's the sense of urgency. The sense of urgency, I totally coincide. It's the sense of urgency, because this is happening, and the time is now. So it's not for somebody else. It's for all of us. And the ESG thing, and namely the climate change impact, is not a nice thing to have because you need to report these KPIs. In our case, unless we build this fiber network, we will not be surviving because the copper network is not going to cope with the amount of capacity that is needed. So, I can run as many numbers as I like, I can run as many scenarios as I like, but I need to do it, because if not, I won't survive. And the same thing with 5G. So my message here is that, the message is loud and clear on the wall, and it's for all of us, and it's now.
The message is loud and clear on the wall, and it's not for somebody else. It's for us. I would love to take questions for any of the panelists. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think you talked about allocating resources, and you said fiddle with things and get things right. Now, when we are trying to do that, one of the key challenges we face is how do you break your organizational boundaries? Digital infrastructure available, platforms available, you are sitting on the front end to drive sustainability. How do you all come together? And things have to be done in months, not in years. But today, by the time somebody comes together, it takes months. How are you going to find models by which you will bring everybody together on a continuous basis, sometimes even within your organization? In your organization, there may be silos. They may not be agile enough to work with it. How do you do that? And secondly, where do you find the talent? Because our company, we have 600,000 people in tech. To find people who can innovate at pace, 90 days, 120 days, it's a big challenge. So we need to address the talent challenge as well as address the boundaries. How do we do that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Do you want me to say?
Jose, do you want to say?
Well, Telefónica was incorporated in 1924, so we are going to be 100 years in 2 years. And we were building a different world, which means that, we thought that innovation was closed clusters, closed ecosystems, and we can develop mostly everything among us and among our chain of suppliers. And the world has changed. Now, open innovation is the way to go. So if we think that we are going to be building the networks for the closed ecosystems that were at the wall of voice, this is no longer the case. So in our case, we have decided to open the network. And open the network means that we're building APIs on our network so people can switch them in our network. And they don't need a specific integration in our network. So my point is that open ecosystems are the way to go. In order to be ready for that, you need to kill the silos that you have internally. Because, in terms of data availability of Telefonica itself, people think that they are the owner of the data of their department. So breaking those silos is essential, and it has taken us years to build that culture. And we build that culture by rotating people among the different things and by making sure that data belongs to the company, not to every single department. So it's a massive cultural change. We use the analogy that we are like the Benjamin Button movie. We were born old for this world, but we have a reverse immunology system, so we become younger every year if we do the right things. So I tend to use the analogy that we are getting closer to Brad Pitt when he's 24 years old. If we do the right things. So it's about killing silos, evolving, changing your company, and it needs to come as a cultural shift. And everybody needs to understand the urgency of that. So we have been spending a huge amount of time in internal comms by telling this is not a nice thing to have, this is a must have. And then in terms of talent, massive reskilling. Artificial intelligence is going to kill millions of jobs. It's going to create millions of jobs. How we handle this transition is going to determine social unrest or not. We are investing very heavily in retraining, reskilling our own labor force, investing millions in that.
Your question is spot on. Sustainability is at the end a team sport. Yeah? So when we are talking about new network, to handle the sheer data volume now with a lot of sustainability data coming on top of the today corporate data. Yeah? When we talk to Shell, we are talking about how do we run this new business models on the sustainability side. You need a different type of asset management. You need a different type of production, which need to be supported by software. Something what we are doing with Shell and roll then out to all of the industry, to Saudi Aramco, to Exxon and the others. And then with Schneider Electric, we of course looking that we can connect the data, the sustainability data, so that we can really come together from the shop floor, to the corporate layer of SAP. And then with Sebastian, my head of strategy, I'm talking, hey, we have this incredible business network. Why can we not bring the whole industry together and connect now all the data we have to not only look at the first horizon or only on my own company, but look at my whole supply chain. And so you see, this is at the end, it's a team sport. No one can solve this challenge alone.
If I may add, sustainability is an interesting topic, which is respect to others, non-competitive. Companies tend to coalesce together, work together to improve together, and improve an industry. So we had that case, just to make an example. 6 months ago, I think 6 months, 9 months, don't hold me accountable for the time. But we work for the pharmaceutical company to work with their suppliers to characterize their scope 3 on their emissions, because all of them were interested by all of those suppliers, which are common suppliers, on their emissions. So they benefited of working together because they work together to get hold of their scope 3. And we did the same thing for the suppliers of Walmart in the US. Walmart wanted to decarbonize. They said, well, let's take my suppliers, help them to save 1 gigaton of carbon. And you see that happening in sustainability, where for the good of the planet and for the good of communities, it's a place where people are much more open to work together and to share data. And it makes life for those people in the supply network much better, because they don't have to supply different sets of things for different customers.
Maybe just one brief addition. I want to get to more structure. I think it depends, of course, on the size of your organisation, but we've been quite conscious that we're going to keep a central function related to that standards aspects of technology. And so that it's clear around what are the sort of non-negotiables which you don't have delegated authority within the respective businesses to recreate. Because absent that, you do end up with a whole bunch of things that just don't come together. And that comes back to the question around replication and standardization, or replication and kind of scaling. So I think we've got a small team that actually house those non-negotiables, right, the key intents. But then we've had to liberate the organisation to say, but then every business needs its own optimisation. I mean, what you might do in e-mobility is very different to what you might do in a deep water optimisation. The risk profiles are wildly different. The customer interface is entirely different. The carbon picture is entirely different. And so I think it is that balance between sort of allowing chaos to reign and then reigning in chaos, right, which is the act of scaling and replicating. And so I think that they're a structural kind of consideration. The other thing we've tried to do on talent, and of course it's a really difficult one, particularly I'd say in the sort of central ecosystem space, because of course people are able to move across a whole variety of different industries. And so many of us, in some respects, I suspect, are competing for talent in that kind of central core. We've tried to roll out a program across all of Shell. We've got 4,000 people now across the assets where they have permission to actually do their own coding, right? It's within a kind of a safe box, if we can call it, as defined by the central team. And then we allow a lot more open freedom and innovation. And we host a lot of kind of events that allow people to kind of see who can generate the best improvement on carbon reductions, and it kind of brings a bit of fun. So you don't necessarily need your technical engineers to do that or your digital engineers. You need anyone with curiosity. And if you look at your workforce today, the demographics that we're recruiting are largely pretty digitally enabled. They can come up with a whole bunch of things, whether they're the frontline engineer or whether they're the asset manager. They don't have to sit in that digital core. And that enables us to, I think, make a lot more momentum and progress than if we were just constraining it in the centre.
Other questions? Right.
First and foremost, it's amazing to see the conviction on climate action from all of you guys. And I was curious if while you invest on decarbonizing your scope 1 and 2, you guys are looking into investing in nature through carbon credits or other ways, which is essential for removing carbon and biodiversity in the next 2 decades. I'm curious what you guys are looking at there.
Yeah, so we are also investing in carbon credits. So we have a clear goal to be net zero next year. And so there, today we're also using carbon credits. But of course, we always also want to watch out what can we do. We are now changing our car fleet only to electric cars. So, carbon credits, it's a nice vehicle and they should not be criticized. But of course, the first task is always to see where can you further decarbonize your own operations.
Yeah, and the key example we use, I mean, historically, if you think of the learning curve on safety, we would try and eliminate the risk in the first instance, and then you seek to reduce the risk, and then finally you mitigate the risk for the exposure that you have remaining. And I think the same philosophy applies to carbon. The first thing we try and do is eliminate it. The second thing we try and do is, of course, reduce it. And then for those areas that we can't reduce, we then seek to mitigate. But I think it's really, really important that it's done in that order, and that then at the end of the day, we do have a residual amount for which we currently use nature-based solutions to offset. But of course, we're hoping that by the time that moment comes where we've currently got nature-based solutions coming in, that technology will have improved so rapidly that in fact we may well be able to do the eliminate and reduce such that the nature-based solutions is certainly not a core component of delivering on our targets. But we also do, of course, because the quality of carbon credits is, of course, something that's very prevalent. We're spending a lot of time in our carbon trading business in understanding how we can get the right quality of carbon credits for use broadly, particularly in an offering to our customers, so that customers can make choices around aviation fuel, like we discussed with blockchain, but also around how they choose to purchase their gasoline and whether they want a nature-based solution or a carbon offset, so that they can immediately see an impact to their carbon footprint.
Let me try to get 1 or 2 more questions in. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Bastia Shiro. I'm a member of the Swiss Parliament and also work at South Pole, a climate solution provider. And it was a great discussion. But there was a lot of focus on measuring and optimizing decision. So at South Pole, we think often also about how to get more action, how to enable digitalization to have action for SMEs, for consumer every day, no? And perhaps I'm not sure whether you have examples going in this direction, no? How can we enable actually do less of measurement for SME instead of asking them to go into the data? So how can they directly jump to action? So perhaps you have ideas in this area so we really can, jump directly or use digitalization to jump directly to action.
I think our experience is already when you supply the right data with the right context, right, with the right inputs, then you already save 5 to 10% because people are then become conscious of what they do, and then they start. Everybody wants to do good, especially if it's good also for their economics, and people really save. Then no doubt that the future is about automatic action. And for that, we need everything to be connected. I'm going to take one example. This morning, we are in another group on Fatih Birol was saying that if we would be able to adjust the thermostats in Europe by 2 degrees, we'd be able to do without Nord Stream 1, right? That's a very simple example. That can work only if every of our thermostats in Europe are connected somewhere to a signal that says, we need to do that now. It's easy. Okay, we are doing that in a number of buildings and homes. We just need to make it operational. So it starts by clear indications of measures. Then it goes into automatic action. And we are speaking about, we're speaking about the edge, for instance. If you are able to make action on the edge without going on the cloud, you will save energy by a factor of 1 million. So every action we can push with analytics directly on the edge in a home, on a machine, in a building, in a data center will have a level of efficiency which is much higher than if you have to make all the compute somewhere. So there are plenty of things that we can do, but gives indication to the consumer on we are all directed to action. Make no mistake. I mean, at the end of the day, we do real time, right? It just get the information, adjust, but it's all the more efficient in the field of energy that you are connected to the bigger ecosystem. You want to store energy, you want to consume energy when this energy is green, cheap, and at the right moment. You cannot, all of us, we cannot all of us charge our electric vehicle on the same parking at the same time, or it's going to be a completely inefficient infrastructure. On where we are today with electrical grid, which I've been working for the past 30 years with, is a quite inefficient infrastructure. It's used at a fraction of its capacity for most of its time. Thanks to digitization, we can really completely change that. We can really bring the level of usage of the infrastructure to a very different level.
Well, thank you all for an excellent discussion. I think this has left many people with lots of ideas of what they might do. I think that you were each excellent painting a picture of what is possible we're not doing today, levers that are probably some of the easiest to pull in what is going to be a multi-decade, very difficult transition. And I hope that we left across lots of ideas for action and partnership. And I thank you all for coming, listening, and being active participants.
Thank you.